As we stated, um, uh, Harold was able to, as part of his commitment during election time, to come through with the development of special commissions to address special problems. In the Latino Affairs Commission, we have very special people who were appointed to it, people who are still active these days, such as Miguel del Valle, who ran for mayor and was a very successful senator, and also city clerk. Jesus Garcia, who recently ran for mayor, he was also a very successful senator and also an alderman. Some said that he gave the mayor of the city the tie to be able to legislate in the city because he was outnumbered by the opposition. And Luis Gutierrez, who actually some say gave him the majority, he's around who gave, but I believe Chuy gave him the tithe and Luis gave him the vote, then to be able to pass legislation without having to use his veto, and just using the majority. We also have people like Inés Bocanegra, an activist in the Puerto Rican community, Aida Sanchez, another activist, who was also in Aspira. From the Mexican community, in addition to Jesus Garcia, was Linda Coronado. I believe Arturo Vasquez also went through the commission. John Betancourt, who was at Hewitt, and UPP went through the commission. I believe Rudy Lozano, who was a well-known activist in the affairs of the Mexican community, who was killed in the midst of his campaign for alderman. Very progressive brother. He also went through or at least helped to develop that commission, assist Harold Washington in developing the commission. And so was Reverendo Morales, Jorge Morales, who also was an activist then. Hipólito Roldán went to the commission. Carlos Heredia went to the commission. Many, now another brother who is Juan Molina, who is an activist in Cleveland, developing and redeveloping what is known as the, is similar to El Paseo Boricua, which was our project in Chicago. I believe it's called La Placita. Some very special project, although in our case is a Puerto Rican project, well defined as the Puerto Rican Paseo is a Puerto Rican community project. And his development in Cleveland is mixed, although the majority are Puerto Ricans. Roberto Maldonado was employed by the Commission on Latino Affairs. Roberto these days is an alderman. He was a county commissioner. So yes, a group of very special people who are still active today went to the Commission on Latino Affairs. But then Harold passed, and it was one of the darkest days, in my opinion, in the history of the city of Chicago, as no mayor before him and after him has been able to bring some policy change within the city that were targeting inclusion of communities into policy development of city government. It's very unique, and as I stated before, Macla and through Macla were able to show that indeed it was feasible. But if there is an interview with the Commission on Women's Affairs, they will say the same thing, or the Asians Affairs. But he passed, and then that created a situation that many of us expected, because what happened was that the Harold Washington coalition was a strong, it has, I would say, has very strong members on it. But it also has members at large who joined Harold Washington because fear, and because it was the right thing to do. It was the convenient thing to do, but not politically committed to Harold Washington and his agenda. That was well detected by the opposition, And when Harold passed, there was a Harold, vice mayor was, I believe his first name was James Sawyer. Um, and then you have his floor leader, who was Tim Evans. Both of them very appointed. I mean, these were positions that were given by the mayor, and he chose to pick these two people. Sawyer was a very weak individual. These days, I have no idea why he was appointed vice mayor. Tim Evans was very eloquent, very progressive. He's now a judge, I think he's the president of the Board of Judges, or whatever the name is, in the state of Illinois. And so the majority of the people concluded that the best person to follow to finish the term of the mayor was actually Tim Evans. But the opposition, who saw a very convenient moment to get the power of the city back, saw the weakest links of Harold Washington group, and started working actually with them. Some of the key members of the opposition were very good organizers actually, and were able to see that this was the moment, because if the city council would have chosen Tim Evans, the chances for them to bring a white mayor back to the city was going to be more difficult, because Tim had the capacity without unifying Harold Washington group, and so they look at Jim Sawyer as the weakest link, and actually work the aldermen who were black, many of them, who worked with Harold Washington Initiative, worked them with who knows how many, what kind of deals they cut behind the scene, because they knew they didn't have the majority, and they needed these people to have the majority to make a decision then to elect Jim Sawyer. It was a very, I remember it was a critical night in the history of the city. And some of us at 2 o'clock in the morning, they were still, the city hall was full with people waiting for the outcome of that huge meeting. The white constituency succeeded in convincing members of Harold Washington Reform Initiative, the group, and were able to group the majority to actually elect Sawyer as the choice. At that point, we knew that we lost the city. We knew that the person that was in the front line from the opposition was Daley, Richard Daley, the son of the previous mayor, who was a caudillo there for many years. And Daley was going to be able to group the white vote, a chunk from the Latinos, and with an African American very weak, because the whole agenda actually was split in pieces. Even bring to their side a good chunk of the African American vote. So Sawyer did not have, he was very, in my opinion, his skills were, he was very lack of skills. And so you know, at the end, Sawyer then was appointed to finish Harold's term. And in the general election, they came up with Daley as their candidate, as planned. It was a master plan. We thought that we needed to make a point, and many of us decided to support Sawyer anyway. Sawyer decided to put his name for the mayor. So right there, the African American vote was split between Sawyer and Tim Evans. And so the outcome was already decided 2 years before when Harold passed and Daley was elected mayor of the city. One of the first things that he just dismantled everything that Harold had put in place, everything, including the commissions. And so he thought that there were 3 commissions, as I stated before. It was the Asian woman and Latino. And Daley came up with a way, in order for him, he couldn't get rid of the commissions because they were executive orders, they were developed by executive orders. So you have to go back to the city council to actually and open up a whole process to justifying why this commission needed to be eliminated. So he brought from nowhere a guy named Clarence Woods, who helped him to draft a plan that would be less painful, that would be politically savvy. And Clarence came up with this idea of, there was the Commission on Human Relations, who was unknown in the city. Nobody knew about the I mean, I didn't know about the Commission on Human Relations, and I was an activist within the city. And so they thought that why not then expand, kind of strengthen the Commission on Human Relations, and then put all this group under the umbrella of the Commission on Human Relations, which was a good idea. A good idea if these commissions would have already finished with their agenda, which of course it was an incomplete agenda. If this commission would have been brought under the Commission on Human Relations with the same strength and power, the same independent. But that was not the deal. The deal was, we're going to have councils. And then he came up with the Council on Latino Affairs, Women's Affairs, Immigrants and Refugee Affairs, Arabs Affairs, Asians Affairs. I mean, everybody have a council. This council have, and all the staff of the existing commissions were recruited by the Commission on Human Relations. But these councils would not have the power of negotiating with the mayor or talking to the mayor. They didn't have access to the mayor, nor anybody within the hierarchy of the city. They needed to first ask for permission to the commissioner, chair of the Commission on Human Relations. And if he chooses, which by the way was Clarence Woods. I mean, it was like putting the fox to guard the chickens. And so if they wanted to go and talk to the mayor, let's say Latinos in regards to employment, and they needed to have a meeting with the mayor, they needed to talk to Clarence Woods. And he did not allow the directors of this council to meet with the mayor, as the commissions used to have. So those commissions and that power, which was the reason why we advanced so much under Harold, were eliminated, and this council with no power. And their staff was from this new pool of staff at large. And their secretary was a pool secretary, which served the Commission on Human Relations, including adjudication, which was the legal arm of the commission, the outreach department and unit. So it was a pool of secretaries having all of them, including this council. So by de facto, he eliminated the commissions and the ability of the commissions to be able to negotiate with the mayor on action, on plans, on policies that were developed by the community to address particular needs of that community. It was a disaster. And so that was a dark page in the history. That page was closed. Harold and whatever remained of Harold was slowly dismantled. The office that used to be guarding the affirmative action plan, which was being enforced by the Department of Personnel, and that group was the one that when I was in the Commission on Latino Affairs, I called them and say I would like to know how many people were employed in next department. and then I would get a response right away, and that gave me the power to see if in that pool, that X department X, the city to send them if it was an affirmative action list. And at that moment, if it was not an affirmative action list, I would tell the director of that watchdog group, it was actually an office, well, to send the list back to the department and ask for, tell them this is not, although in many cases I don't have to do it, they did it themselves. So when I ask, they tell me what happened and they tell me the story. Pablo, they send a list here, but we send them back, and yes, they send the list that they send now is an affirmative list with fair representation of the city labor force. That office was dismantled right away. Then you have to, if you needed any number, you have to, in many cases, I remember going to meetings with the new commissioner, who behind the scene was very eloquent, telling us about the limitations. And who says that in many cases you have to go to freedom of information, which took 6 months. I mean, he just destroyed the whole thing. Anyway, that was my new life with the city. Under Latino Affairs, the commissioner, Harold Washington, commissioner of personnel, when he passed, he knew that a group of us needed to stay in the city to carry on as much as we can Harold Washington agenda above and beyond his death. A group of us was elected, our position were reclassified and then were protected, and mine was one of those. And so, although I got into the Commission on Human Relations as an enemy of Clarence Woods, because we fought him to the end, he was not able to touch me because my position was protected, and the only way he could fire me was if I would have not been able to carry on my responsibility, which to me was a natural. So